That on? I can't tell. Oh, there we are. All right, good evening. All right. So while we wait for the inevitable other 20 people to come in, I want to take a moment. No matter what, I'm going to be pastor on this, but it is the walk/run for the cure, or not for the cure, for life, yeah. And so, it is to support pregnancy choices, and so my first request is I need some bold team members who are walkers in air quotes. Because this year there is not an actual walk. So even if you cannot walk, you can be a team member. The point is you get to help me raise the money for our team here from Holy Cross. So what I need are bold people who know at least 9 other individuals. That's all of you. So, if you feel like talking to those individuals and your friends, let me know afterwards, and you can be a team member and get a free shirt. And if we win, you get another shirt. And if you don't want to be a team member, well then, that's okay. I still love you guys. And you can instead help with a $25 or more donation to our team. Right now, Holy Cross is number 1, and I am now the second walker after Rosemarie. Pastor's third. So our team's doing well, but it's going well. So if you have any interest in that, I would love to have some team members, or at least help our team out. All right, so with that, let me know afterwards if you're interested. I might say something at the end, but let's go ahead and start with prayer quick. Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for this evening, that we can all arrive here safely. And I ask that you would help our conversation and everything that I say to be for our good and for the good of those you love, that by being here tonight we can know more about those people who you love and who you wish that they would hear and trust in the gospel of your Son, Jesus Christ, and come to faith in you. So bless all that we do this evening, that it may be for the good of those around us and also for us. We ask this in your name. Amen. So good evening, everyone. It's good to have you back. Tonight we are going to be stepping into an amorphous topic, but one that you see on the news more than anything when it's related to Muslims. And so I'm going to call it Muslim society or culture. And you're going to learn very quickly that that's not really a thing, which sounds ridiculous, because then how am I going to spend the next hour talking to you about it? You'll see. It's just really hard to pinpoint. It's like saying, if you're an American, what is your culture? Well, there are, grains and strands that connect all of us, more or less. But, there's something very different about someone who grew up in the bayou from someone in New York City. Right? So it's just true of people. People vary. But there are enough strands connecting Muslims that we're going to talk about that and start to understand some of these things that we see in the news. So first, oh, come on, you just worked. There it is. All right, so a unified culture of Muslims. Is there really such a thing? And I don't think there is. Because there are nearly 2 billion Muslims in the world today. It's around, give or take 1/4 of the world's population. And so it's really hard to say that there's a unified culture, because there are just so many different peoples and people groups that make up Islam. So that's like saying someone from the Philippines who's a Muslim is going to be the same as a Canadian-born Muslim. different cultures start to blend and things interact. And so just as we talked last week that there is variance in their beliefs, there's variance in their cultures and what they believe about society. But, because again, they have a unified source, right? If you were to make a branch of the Islamic culture, they all come from the same thing. There are those strands in that DNA that give some commonalities. You can do the same thing with Christians. You know, let's take the classic example, since we're coming up on the 500th anniversary. You have Lutherans and Catholics, right? And yet, you go back 500 years and there's this commonality. We're different, but you know what? We're all going to confess Christ, you know, crucified and risen for us. So, you know, it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but if you wanted to say what a Christian believes, you can get down to it. If you want to say what a Christian culture is, you know, it's harder, but you can start to massage some of this out. So we will be looking at the culture of Islam. And so when I say culture, I'm specifically referring to when you go down that tree that make up all these cultures of Islam and you start to get to the root of it, what does it say basically in the Quran? What is it proposing that Islam and Muslims should be based on that and a couple other writings? Now if you already noticed it, we're up here in the branches of Islam, right? The culture, where it's all spread and variable, and I want to go down here to the Quran. There's already a lot of distance. So I'm also going to try and cover some of the big themes and how we see them today in modern societies, you know, Islam societies. So those are the two big things we're going to shoot for tonight. So we start with society. And I'm going to do my best to cover it, because when you say the word society and culture, that's a very, very broad term. So you can just as quickly say society includes how you raise your children. Or society can include how you get around. I can't go into all these details, and really there's not a commonality when you get to some of these fine details. But just realize that a culture infects every part of a person's life, whether they realize it or not. That means Islam, which kind of carries a culture of its own, is going to affect the gambit of details in a person's life. Most things are touched, and this is interesting because the Bible as we know it doesn't actually talk about a lot of things. You know, Jesus says a lot about divorce, but he's not making a statement on only travel via camels, right? That just doesn't really show up. Islam, on the other hand, gets into a lot more of the nitty-gritty and detailed daily things and touches on those. The problem is, again, we can't go over all of them. And I also want to start with this. This is not Sharia law that we're talking about. That is a legal system, and we are talking about how people live their lives as Muslims. But I will actually bring up Sharia law and talk about it, because like I said, this is kind of the day when you get the news tidbits. So if you have questions, you heard it on the news, bring it up today. Today's a great day for it, because we're going to talk about how Muslims live. And so with that out of the way, I want to first look at how Muslims deal with family, marriage, weddings, children. What does the family unit consist of? And so what have you heard or seen on the news about this sort of thing? Male-dominated. Yes. Paternal lineages. Lots of kids. I would say a lot of wives too, right? The Quran does allow up to 3 wives per male. Anything else? I think male-dominated is the big one, right? That's how we think of it. Well, it's interesting then, when you think of how a society arranges itself, you know, what kind of groupings and things, kind of like, you know, I think of Legos, what size Legos and how you put them together, because that's what I liked when I grew up. For Islam, the family unit, father, mothers, and children, that is the basic building block and the basic piece of society that Islam kind of raises up. And so this will actually guide both, religious practices. It'll determine how marriage things work. It affects even how personal well-being is taken into account. Because something we quickly take for granted is the question, who cares for the children? And we have our answer generally, and we even might have some variance here, but that's a question that Islam finds very important. And so just as we expect with our families, they do believe that the parent's job is to take care of their kids. So if you have a child or children, it is your job to make sure they are good to go. Healthy, supplied, cared for. This would include their well-being. A lot of times this will go to extended families, cousins, aunts, uncles. They're family too, so you care for them. But this also includes making sure that your children are given the both moral and spiritual education they need. It falls to the family unit to make sure that you are raising God-fearing, good Muslim kids. And I think, oddly enough, this is what we would hope we did as Americans, right? I think especially this is what we hope we would do better as Christians, as we move away in Western society, to say that we want the parents to be doing this. And now it's kind of, I think we're seeing the expectation that that's other people's job. I don't know, any thoughts on this or any questions so far? Roger?
Is the family structure, husband, wife, children, is that set up in the Quran, or is that something that was developed as just social?
It is, so he said, is the mother, father, children family unit set up in the Quran? It is, with the variation from us that a man can have up to 3 wives, but it still is kind of one.
Because, like Al said, it's a very dominant male society. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's set up in the Quran or if that's something that's developed.
You mean the male dominant part? Is the male dominant part set up in the Quran? In certain circumstances, it is. And in others, I think you'll find later as we talk about it, it shockingly to us is not set up in the Quran. It very much is there to set up a role for men and a role for women, which again, I don't think is too far from our Christian understanding. God made 2 genders and we do different things, and they kind of take that to more of a, not extreme, but they raise that idea up at more than we tend to nowadays. So I think we'll answer your question as we continue talking.
And
yeah.
I guess their definition of marriage are obviously, someone doesn't have 2 moms, they or kids.
No, yeah. Yes, just because a man has multiple wives does not mean that they have 2 mommies, yeah. It's still a mother and a father is the unit. Anyone else? All right, well, go ahead, raise your hand if anything comes to mind. One of the things I think we're aware of is that for most Muslims in the world, marriage is a social contract between, 2 family units, right? So you have the child of family A and the child of family B, and they are going into a social contract. And so this involves, the presence of witnesses. Someone has to be there to attest that a marriage happened. There's a gift giving from the new husband to his wife. And on top of that, there's a bridal gift paid by the groom. You got to buy. There's a transaction of goods in the process. Which, not what we do today, generally. I mean, we give gifts and stuff, and there are people at our weddings, usually. But this is much more of an exchange, and that's getting more into, I think, what we would just kind of call biblical ideas of marriage, right? Or if you want, you can just call it ancient ideas of marriage. And this is a detail because, and I'm not saying any of us, and I hope I never convey this idea, but I think there's a misconception that in the world that Muslims their religious practices and maybe even their marriage practices are more barbaric or something, right? That they're just going to marry off their daughter and sell her. But it is actually said in the Quran that both the groom and the bride must consent to the agreement of their own free will. So it's not like dad says, you're going to go marry that guy. She actually is given the right to go, no, I'm not. But I think it just reinforces this idea that it's a family decision. Because mom and dad are, out there swinging the deal, if you will, but, son and daughter are there as participants too. So it's not like they have this utter lordship over their children. They're there to see the well-being of the children, and the children have a say in it. Mm-hmm. Yes, but, okay, so part one, she said that we see sometimes in the news where a daughter refuses the marriage and is killed for it because she's, disobeying her parents or something. And we do, and that's why I started off by saying modern Islam today, and what I'm going to be talking to you about, is the commonality from the Quran. Because trying to get all of these disparate practices from around the world won't happen. But you're right. There's already, I hope you're seeing that there's a disconnect between what is in the Quran and how many of them are practicing it. So at no point, I think, would anyone back, at the time that the Quran was written say, if your daughter disagrees, kill her. In fact, it very explicitly says, she has to consent. So what would be the difference today is part of what I want us to start thinking about.
So this is great, okay, is it okay for them to probably honor type killings where your family has been shamed or something?
Mm-hmm.
And you hear lots about like lines of that, not necessarily there is an honor type killing that might take place or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Crime or something.
Yeah. So he brought up honor killing, that if the family's pride or, I can't think of the word that I want. Reputation, that's closer, yeah. That if the family's reputation is hurt, they can kind of kill the person who brought shame to the family and retrieve it. And again, this is in the scope of things, very modern thing. It had to be a very extreme circumstance because this did happen. The cases I'm thinking of, let's say 800 years ago, you have a fourth son and he is out sleeping around, he's drunk all the time, he lives a debaucherous life, he refuses to listen to his parents, and he never repents and returns to Allah. He's not living a Muslim life. At that point, they would consider that as a viable option. Now, today, it seems to be, at least what we see in the news, that it's more of a, I don't like what she did, and she disagreed with the family, is what it usually is. But that is not historically what it was. So one of the big parts I'm getting to tonight is this idea of cultural drift. What have these things that were in place 1,300 years ago become today? But thanks for bringing that up. We'll get there later. Anyone else?
Well, I'm sure we're getting a lot of things mixed up. What you said earlier, we're not really discussing Sharia law right now.
Yeah.
The honor of the family, the daughter has committed sex outside of marriage. It is an honor to kill her. I'm sure the Quran didn't say women can't drive.
Yeah.
So they have adapted with the times also, maybe not in a modern sense, but they have adapted their rules also.
Yeah. There's been drift from what we see in history. That's why tonight I'm trying to give you the more historical thing, because what we hear in the news is modern, right? That we get more so. And I want us to, at the end, really be thinking and comparing the two and seeing maybe what happened, why this is going on.
Or a man can divorce his wife by renouncing her, but the wife cannot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'll get there. Marnie?
Even if there's a misinformation out there, I read something recently that's, I think, doesn't believe what it's saying.
Sharia law, even if it's Sharia law, really, but they use it. I haven't been but I've been reading that it is, and that if you deny Sharia law, you can't kill it.
So the question was, I seem to have suggested that Sharia law is not a uniting thing among Muslims, and I hope that's what I convey later on very clearly, because it's not. It's an old thing, but it's only really been popular in the last 100, 150 years. And really in the last 70 has it really become popular in Islam. And as far as misinformation goes, I don't know, I'm of the opinion that people are out to make Muslims appear as they want them to be. And that worries me because I see the same thing with people doing that to Christianity. So I hope that we're able to give Islam and Muslims a fair shake here in these 5 weeks. Because they do things that we obviously don't agree with, but we also want to look at it as holistically as we can in 5 hours. So what I'm saying is there's misinformation, whether you saw it or not, I don't know. But we will talk about Sharia law. Okay, we'll get there. I put it last for a reason, right? All right. Let's talk about multiple wives for a moment. Muslim men can have up to, modern days, it changes. But originally it was you can have up to 4 wives at once. No more, no less. And the reason is, or no more, but you can have less, sorry. Today, sometimes that changes. No more, no less. You got to have 4, Tom. I saw you laughing. And men were allowed to have them, but there is the explicit requirement that all wives are to be treated equally. Which is not what I assumed, right? I assumed you're going to have the best and the other ones are just clean the house or something. I don't know. And not only that, but but all of the children are equal. So it's this distillation of the family unit of respect and care for all of them. But you'll notice if there's only one guy, every wife he gets, he's getting that many more children, that many more mouths to feed, and it really is a thing of burden. Not burden, it's an increase in responsibility for the man. And that is why the limit was presumably 4. Or else you could end up, we'll say with 500 wives, 500 concubines, and you may not be able to take care of them. Now, I make a joke at Solomon's expense, but he was a wealthy guy. Not every Muslim man, in fact, the vast minority, would actually have multiple wives because you had to be able to care for them. They're not going out and working, so to speak. They're not bringing home what we would consider income, and you still have to feed them. You still have to care for them, house them all. And so this is why having multiple wives also was connected to being an honorable guy. Because if you're able to care for all of them, then presumably you're doing something right. Presumably Allah is happy with you, and He is giving you what you deserve in support of your household. So multiple wives, it's not like he got free slaves out of it or something. It was a thing that he was able to take on, be blessed by, because he had already been blessed with the ability to care for them.
Do they live in the same house, or do they live in the vicinity of each other? How do they live?
I do not know. The question was, do they live in the same house or the vicinity? And I don't know. Did you ever see that show with Sister Wives or whatever? Yeah, that's what's going through my head. And that one, he had like one big house with things split off. I don't know if it's a situation like that. I honestly have not looked it up nor ever been told. My guess would be they would, based on the reasoning for it, this kind of idea of the unified family block, I'd imagine they're close by, but who knows? Not me. Sorry, I can't be of more help.
There's a lot of multi-generational homes.
Yeah. Yeah. Building rooms is, building a big house is difficult and rare. It reminds me of when I was going to Haiti. Pastor read my sermon, and I made an analogy in my sermon about you have 2 houses, and he goes, make it 2 rooms. Because if you wanted to add a room to your house, you put a wall in the middle. That's really, I mean, we're talking smaller things. So, yeah, I don't know.
I think in their culture, they're not allowed to borrow money.
I think, and you might be able to speak more to this. I thought they were allowed to borrow. I just thought usury was illegal, which is you can't make money on giving a loan. Because I know that's the way it is in Judaism, so I'd imagine that carries through. But
This might be attention to child rights and special.
okay, child brides. Yeah. I don't know if you want to chalk it up to different cultures. It's allowed. The question is, one, what do you consider a child? And two, how young of a child? There has been what I would call abuses of that throughout Islam. I mean,
For example, Iran is lower than the legal age of marriage.
from 10 to 9 is now the legal age of marriage. In Iran, she says, wow, I did not know that. That begs the question then, are these 9-year-old females able to give the consent that the Quran would suggest they should be able to give? I don't know. That's outside of my understanding, but that does bring up a good question. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? All right. So, and I forgot to mention, I assumed everyone knew it. Men can have multiple wives, women can have one husband, right? So it's not like you get these weird webs or something. And we get then to this, which is a more specific idea of women in Islam. And so we've already heard that most of us have heard, or at least have the notion, that men are dominant in Islam. But it really does. Women's role in Islam really, really varies greatly by where they're at in the world, which culture they're a part of, or even which school or sect of Islam they are a part of. That being said, there are commonalities which we see more often, and these come from the Quran and other important teachings. So the first one that I think is important to mention is that the Quran says women are spiritually equal to men. I don't know if this is necessarily like our idea that in Christ there is no man or woman, but I think it's along the same vein as my understanding of it, where Allah can, bless a woman as well as a man. This idea of spiritually equal. But it kind of still is hard for us to, I think, understand, at least for me as a, 21st century American. Because when you put that in with this idea that they see genders as complementary, right? So God made man and woman, they complement each other. But you take them apart, they're not doing the same things. What do you think of that? Is that something we're used to? Hearing? Generally, I'm seeing nods. Well, and then there's a not nod. Do you care to say why you're not nodding? No, behind you, my wife.
I would say more from the secular perspective that we are not.
I would agree with that, right? From a cultural perspective, men and women are not complementary. In fact, I think we're quickly approaching this idea of, let's be honest, we're there, where there's just this blur and everyone can do everything. I don't think that's the Christian view. And it's at least not the initial Muslim view. And that's why you get this idea that women and men do different things, and it's for the good of the family. And so the Quran is very explicit about dictating what these roles are that women have and men have. So men, their kind of realm where they are responsible for the family is they go out in the public, they go out in the marketplace, they take care of the family, they bring home the goods, etc. The woman, her role for the good of the family is to be home, cleaning, caring for the kids. She is the primary caregiver, I think, is a term we would use now for the children. And that's not unknown to the West, but it really bounces off of, we'll say, modern sensibilities. And I say that not saying I like the modern sensibilities. How many, and this is honestly why you have the West today, which says there is no gender role specified. And then you have Islam over here saying, no, God made two, and they complement each other, they do different things. So now, I believe it was you who mentioned the women aren't allowed to drive in a lot of Muslim countries, right? Well, women aren't allowed to do a lot of things in a lot of Muslim countries. Part of that, I think, is an extension over the last 1,300 years of this idea that men are public figures and women are private household caretakers. So driving is in public, right? Unless you have a really big house. And so men get that. Women need to be covered up more so outside because they're in public now. You know, men at home privately aren't generally the caretakers and the educators for the children. You know, like the teaching them and bringing them up is how I would put it. And so you get this difference. And I don't know if it's just the gulf has been widening for 1,300 years or something, but there is a difference than what is explicitly said in the Quran. Right. Any questions or anything? Okay. Let me know if you have any. And specifically, one of the things we see nowadays is that women in Islam countries are not given, shall we say, fair educational chances. Like they do not get educated. They don't have rights to education like men do. And explicitly, the Quran says that women must have as much right as men to education. I would say it doesn't match what we generally see today. And the interesting part is that it says women, in regards to education, they have as much right, both in terms of, we'll say, scholarly stuff, you know, the sciences, mathematics, and they have as much right to spiritual education. Now that doesn't mean because men and women have distinct roles, that women are going to be, you know, imams, so they wouldn't be the pastors, we'll say, but it doesn't mean they're exempt in the Quran from learning the things, which was very surprising to me, because I don't think that's what we see today, really anywhere. It is, I guess, what it is. Yeah.
I would say that it's economical, it's financial, because wealthy, as long as women are highly educated, and or as long as children are fully educated. The difference is that as long as women are educated, as long as women, because we always get female men.
Yeah.
But having taught in the school there, girls are educated in the modern wealthier countries. There are certainly Iran and Iraq.
Okay.
But women are educated and
Yeah.
their education is kind of tied.
Interesting. So for those that didn't hear, and for the sake of the recording, she said that women, it ends up being a thing of money. Families that have money are going to have women that are more highly educated. Families that don't have money don't. And is that basically a priority of males getting educated over females then? Or are the males as equally uneducated at?
I would say probably more males just because they want to talk to people.
Okay, so the males are prioritized?
Women that I work with were highly educated. In fact, a lot of them would seem to be educated.
Interesting.
But to private important schools and because they can be educated.
Okay. So this might not be so much a cultural restriction against women, it's just more a financial cultural thing that they prioritize men. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, obviously some countries are.
They're repressing,
Yeah.
but I don't know from my experience that that's necessarily
Okay.
that's just the same as people that suppress women in any country,
Yeah.
not on religion.
Right. Thank you for that. Bonnie?
I'm sure it's country country.
Yes. Yeah. Some countries are just way over there, and others, yeah. Like I said, it's hard to kind of get a holistic sense because there's variety. Anyone else? I thought I saw one more hand somewhere. All right, I'm making it up. All right. So having said that, my next point was to say basically take everything I said and throw it out about women. And I think you bring up a good point. Because as you have both pointed out, Iran and Iraq, Syria, whatever it will become after this whole thing, they're going to be very different situations than a Muslim woman in America, or a Muslim woman in Australia, even in, the Philippines. I think this is one of those cases where we have this idea more so that women don't have any access to education, and it really is one of those stereotypes that does not hold true. So make of that what you will. That being said, are there Muslims who would disagree and say that, allowing women to have any schooling is not stringent enough and vice versa? Yeah, you're going to get both. So, like I said, it's not really, don't hang your hat on that.
I recall a lot of our initial information we got in the United States about Islam came from the Taliban.
Yeah.
There is tremendous repression of women there.
Yeah.
Every before.
That's a very good point. So Pastor said that a lot of what we know, think of when everyone became educated by Taliban, or educated about Islam, kind of came after Taliban. And so it's like if you had to hone in on them with a microscope and assume that that's Islam, then yeah, they greatly repress women. And, I think they're a very specific extreme case, but that's what we tend to know from news and stuff.
Well, in the case of Iran, if you look at Iran before the revolution, women were
Yeah.
more highly educated before the revolution than after.
Yeah. So she brought up the point, and I love seeing the pictures. In Iran before the revolution, you can go back and see them wearing like the best 70s, like lapels out to here, and they had bell bottoms, and they look, other than they were Middle Eastern looking, couldn't tell a difference between their clothing and wear. And then after the revolution, it's now how we think of them, covered head to toe.
Yeah, I was with the White House in 1988, and we broke from tradition and brought in as our first foreign dignitary leader in Pakistan, who was a female at the time, trying to shore her up. But shortly afterwards, she returned to her country. She was killed by her.
Oh, geez. All right. Continuing troubles over there. 88 seems like a long time ago for me, but
Even before all this other stuff. So
yeah. Cool. Thank you.
About the whole concept of, I know currently in Iran, if I were to learn a long time, the development of Iran, that's just cultural.
So are you asking this based on, does it say this for all women sort of thing? So her question was, in Iran right now, even if you women here were to go there, you have a lot of the restrictions. You'll be covered, you'll be a certain distance from all males in public, that sort of thing. And the question was, is that in the Quran? I don't know if that's explicitly said, but I doubt it. I'd imagine it's one of those things where, it says women need to be respectful and subordinate to their husband or to males, and then, you take that where you will, but I don't know specifically in that detail. Sorry, again, can't be more help. There's just so many facets that... Rosie? Why do the women have to wear all the garb, including covering their face? Because someone said they must? That is not explicitly said in the Quran, and that I'm sure of, that they have to be so completely covered, even having to look through fabric. It says that women need to have their heads covered, and in public they need to be more, because public is the realm of man, so women are not, you don't go around being prideful or look at me as a woman. And that's from the Quran. But basically today, I'm not sure how it got there, but it was just the culture continually pushing that thing of women, need to be subservient, and then, well, you know what, let's just basically try and make them, I think, essentially invisible, so that they're not even in the realm of man, which is public. So...
I know that when I was speaking to this one Muslim lady, it was in the summertime, and she was in the car, dressed like we were in shorts and things like that. And she said when she goes home, she has to dress in the car.
Yeah. Well, that is why, how many of you have seen women walking around with Is that one is that a burqa or hijab? I'm switching them in my mind now. Hijab is completely covered. The burqa is the head wrapping, right? And the long dress. I've seen a lot of that, but I have never seen a hijab before. At least in America. I mean, obviously I've not been outside. Yeah, at the airport and stuff, yeah. Because the Quran does say, women need to be respectful and, kind of carry yourself in a reserved manner, and part of that is cover your head. So they do so, but you don't generally see a hijab around because you do at your public park? Wow. I would wonder how recently they came over and moved to America. Because I would imagine either it's very soon or they're from a very specific kind of family. But, all right, anyone else? All right, well, okay, I will stop the suspense now and let's talk about Sharia law. So I will get to this map in a moment, but I want to say that first off, right off the bat, Sharia law is not laid out in the Quran or any other books of great importance. It just is not in them at all. The word isn't mentioned, it's not there. This Sharia law is a tradition, and it's based off the varying interpretations of the Quran and the Hadith. And if you remember, Hadith mean the various teachings. There's a ton of them, and they vary all over the place in terms of who has what. And in conjunction with this, you have Sharia law, which is the interpretation and tradition based off of Quran. And then on the other hand, you have the other word up there that starts with an F, which is fiqh. And fiqh is the interpretation of Sharia. So a lawyer, to use our terms, would be practicing fiqh. So if the law says blank, well, what does that actually mean? If it says X, what is the fiqh? How do you apply it? Because the thing is, realistically, we do the same thing here, right? We have all of our, documents in America, and what do we have? We have lawyers, judges, juries, all trying to figure out how that applies now or in this instance. So this isn't anything new. This is just how law works, because you literally cannot write down, if a man has walked 3 steps and then accidentally bumps someone and he gets hit by a car and dies. But if he walked 4 steps, then he's guilty. There's got to be that interpretation aspect of just being human, basically. So you have Sharia and you have fiqh, the interpretation. And this is another case where every single sect of Islam, every single country and culture use Sharia differently. And if they use Sharia differently, then that means their interpretation is also different. And that brings us to the map above. And I hope you can see it. I will tell you what the colors mean, and hopefully you can pick them out on the map there. So this is every country that is majority Muslim is colored in one way or another. And they vary in their own use of the law. So if you see the light green ones, like most of Africa, that means Sharia law plays absolutely no role in the judicial system in that country. Not at all. You will never encounter it at all. And that includes Turkey and Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, not Afghanistan, but north of there. The bright yellow, which is the rest of Africa and India, Sharia applies to Muslims' personal laws. So it doesn't apply to everything a Muslim does, but it applies to some of a Muslim's life, but no one else. All right, so that's like, we use it, but barely. The next one is the purple, which are those countries that we think of as, the Muslim ones. And their Sharia applies completely. It includes criminal law, and it applies to every single person there. When we think of Sharia, I believe that is what we are usually thinking of, is that usage. Where, hello, Alan, welcome to, I can't even think of a country off the top of my head. Saudi Arabia, thank you. Welcome to Saudi Arabia. You are now under Sharia law because you are in our country. The last color, which is the orangish, And that's really only over there in the Philippines and looks like Thailand. That's regional variations. So maybe one state, like let's say Michigan has Sharia law and Ohio only uses it this way and New York doesn't use it. That's a metaphor here, right? So maybe half the country uses it, the other half doesn't, and the other half another little tidbit uses it a lot. So looking at the map, are you surprised at all by the variations in use? Generally, I'm seeing head nods, yeah? Because we hear about it so much and so often, basically with those purple countries, that you would assume that it's everywhere. I did, until I, was actually like, let's figure out Sharia law. And it gets more interesting, because I am always playing catch up with anything from 1800 to now. It's just not my knowledge, it's a knowledge gap for me. So this I had to learn and look up. But my, specialty and interest is in history before 1800. And I can tell you that Sharia law was almost never used. So rarely used. And if it was used, it was like little bit. No country until these modern countries started to exist ever sat down and said, we are going to have Sharia law completely for everyone. This is a modern implementation in mass. And it is based, the question is, how do these apply? And until recently, Sharia law didn't really apply. It applied often in this aspect. And I don't know if you remember from the first day I mentioned Ottoman Empire, right? That really big one that existed until Pastor Ted was born. So there's Ottoman Empire. They had two law systems which kind of varied in their usage. One based off of Roman, and one that was purely Turkish in origin. You'll notice neither of those are Sharia. This is the biggest Muslim country to ever exist, and they use Sharia in only one way. If you had like a really weird situation, and all the lawyers are trying to figure it out, and neither of their two law systems talk to it, well then, we'll go look for guidance from Sharia. Sharia wasn't the law, it was just a source of guidance and maybe some understanding to help their current laws. So realize this is not a common thing until modern day. That being said, what is Sharia? Right? That's a good question to ask, because it sounds bad. Like, I hear the word and I think bad. And depending on how you apply it, I think we can very easily go, yeah, that's bad. But it was only ever designed as a way to initially have good order as a government. Because the Quran doesn't actually come out and say, here's how you should govern yourselves very specifically. And so if you're a Muslim and you have the Quran and you want to be faithful, how do you come up with a government? Well, hopefully, you'd turn, if I were to say that to a Christian, hey Christian, I need you to make a government, where would we generally start? Right? Are we going to separate our faith from it? That's how America was kind of started, this awkward middle ground, but I would be like, maybe the 10 Commandments would be a really good starting point. They did the same thing. They took the Quran and did it. The problem is, again, interpretation. So we came up with this set based on the Bible and our faith. It still needs to be applied in some way. They had the same problem, and that's where we get all the variances. Any questions? Yeah. To what do I attribute the growth of Sharia law? Can I answer that in a few minutes? Because I've been thinking about this for years, and getting back into the research, I have a theory that I really like. But
Reinforcing your earlier statement, that map, 3/4 or more of those countries did not exist in their present form until after World War I.
yes.
Which would be the breakup of the Ottoman Empire.
Yes. Yeah. So his point was, looking at this map, most of those didn't even exist until after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire finally kind of disintegrated. But that leaves the question. The old government's gone, how do we govern ourselves? And it looks like a lot of them said, Well, Sharia law has something to offer us. I think that's a big part of it. Anyone else? Okay, we're almost done here. That being said, Sharia law in modern day, today it is used by as source material. Sometimes it is used for Muslims only, sometimes it is used for only personal or religious things, and other times it is what we think of, it's used by everyone. It's the only law in the land. But it has never really been that popular until now. And so I guess now is when I will share my theory. The question is then, how do we get Islam, I would say diverging from the Quran, becoming more extreme in its understanding of women and men divide, and really embracing Sharia law like it has never in its 1,300 years of existence? And my thought is that especially after the colonial period and the colonialization and the empires of Europe, we started to get this split where Muslims saw themselves as non-European, non-Western. And once they started to think that, the question then is, how do we be not Western? So as globalization has increased, especially following World War I, the question is, hey, you know, my kid is wearing clothes like those Western people, but I'm not Western, I'm not European. How do you start to reinforce yourself against Westernism? And I think the quickest way to be not Western, not European, is Sharia law. It is so distinct, it will never be used by any European government that can avoid it. And so if you really want to say I'm Muslim and I am unique compared to the Europeans in this way, Sharia law is a quick way to do it. That's my theory. Basically, how do I reinforce my Muslimness? It's kind of I'm going to hunker down and just be Muslim even more so than I was before. And you see that when people are under threat, they double up. And I think we're even starting to see that in Christianity in America as we realize we're not what we were in this country. And so you're seeing people going, all right, you know, everyone's like, what do? We got to be Christian. Well, let's go out there and really, you know, do X, or let's get out there and do this, or hey, you know what? We're going to just be ourselves unabashedly and everyone else be darned. These are kind of the variety. So it's what happens when you're changing and you don't want to change. But that's, again, literally my theory. Throw it out if you don't want. Any last questions? And really, whatever you got, because next week we get to where the rubber meets the road. Week 4 is Christian and Islam, let's compare and contrast them. And then week 5 is take that and how do we reach out and proclaim to a Muslim?
Yeah, we talked about the news that you just had, and so this is real. Sodomy and sin of death after insulting the prophet Muhammad on Twitter.
Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah. And sentenced to death for that. Now, those like purple countries, if we went in there and talked about Christ, I think we would also face it.
Yes. Talking about Christ in those purple countries is not something I would envy, and yet maybe needs to be done.
Yeah.
Talk to Chad Miner if you want to hear. One of his good friends is currently in Sudan right now, Sudan, Chad. And literally, it's like, I hope he didn't die this week. It's, God be with them, but I can't imagine. And yet Jesus is a prophet? Yeah, but he cannot be the Son of God in a Muslim understanding, because then you're making Allah lesser. Yeah. We'll go front to back.
2 weeks ago, I think you said that Paul died with 900 years.
You mean Muhammad? Yeah.
900 years, the Quran.
Not 900. 200. 200 is the first time, 200 years after Muhammad's death is the first time we see evidence that someone had the Quran floating around. That doesn't mean it didn't exist beforehand, but 200 years is a long time between supposed writing and evidence of it.
There is no evidence.
There is none that we have. How about that? That should bring up problems, especially when you compare it to the first evidence of Jesus is from 20 years after him. You know, if you wanted to prove without the internet that Tyson Bentz existed and it took 200 years, I'd start to go, who is that guy? Marty?
You said Sharia law is used in all those countries. Is Sharia law the same in all those countries?
Actually, based on this, Sharia law is not used in every colored country. The green ones are Muslim majority countries that do not use it. And then, sorry, what was the question?
Is it the same in all the different?
So the countries that use Sharia law have every variety of usage.
Every variety of usage, but is the law the same?
Is the law the same? No and yes. I mean, it's kind of the same vein, but realize that whole interpretation and tradition thing really makes things change quickly. So, short answer, no, but they're not like wildly different. But there's no, saying Sharia law is almost silly because what is it? You can't get a book of Sharia law and have it match other countries. Arnie?
I think we want to have early birds, Muslim, all in this country, good morning, many others.
Yep.
Or is it born in that country?
Yes.
Do you know how they feel about Sharia law?
I don't. His question was, we are getting, colonies is a good word, colonies of Muslims in America, Dearborn, Minneapolis, and one right next door in Akron is growing very, very quickly, which is why I thought this would be interesting and beneficial for you. And he asked, do I know how they view Sharia law? I have no idea. If you meet one and get to know them, you could ask. I don't know. It would be, you know of Pablo, and it would be maybe best to send them an email, either you or I, and ask that question, because I do not know. Brad?
Like that massacre in Charlie Hebdo, France.
Yeah.
They threw the character was that a response based on Sharia law, or is that a response based on the Quran, or is that a response based on something on the wall?
Yeah. So the question was, with Charlie Hebdo in France, who drew the Prophet Muhammad, and there was, we'll say, a slaughter, right? In retaliation. And what is that based off of? The Quran says, do not portray him. And so they broke the Quran. But why would they go and make the point of finding this guy in France and killing him for it? One, I think you're right, part of it's anger. But I really think they're seeing this as an attack on what it is to be Muslim. You get this Western guy who is just so flippantly disregarding your rules. It becomes a very personal attack, is how I think it is. It's this Western versus Muslim culture thing. And so to do that, they're seeing Westernism again just go phooey. And that's scary. That's something they retaliate. Heidi?
He didn't just do it once.
No, he did not just draw it once.
Asked him to stop, and refused to stop as well, and also somebody who is unrepentant.
Yes, he did draw the Prophet multiple times, was asked to stop, I'd say kindly, and he did not. That would bother me, so I wouldn't go kill him, but...
I mean, again, it makes it seem like, well, we weren't tolerant of that. Well, I feel the same way. I mean, I can't keep my savior in their country where they would kill me, or they'll try to kill me over here. I can't go to Mecca. I mean, they seem to have a huge degree of intolerance about us. Yet we seem to be always portrayed as the ones being intolerant of them.
Tolerance being a two-way street, right?
Yeah, and I think we are very calm.
I think we're gonna, yeah. I think we're trying to be, I don't know. I think we're getting into this us versus them thing that they are, and the more we get angry at, you know what I mean? It's just, I think it's a war of cultures, not a war of religions, and religion is tied up.
As we go through all of this, what keeps coming to my mind is somebody in the Middle East could be teaching a class on Christianity and have almost the same story. You know, there's all these different ways they
Yeah.
read the Bible. Some churches do this, and some hate faith, and some hate this, some want to kill. I mean,
Yeah.
extremes of Christianity too.
There is. Well, I'm glad that's coming through your head. So if you didn't hear, she said they could be teaching this class on Christianity somewhere in one of these countries and saying, look how varied they are. And I think that's part of what I'm getting at, is trying to humanize Islam and Muslims, because it's really hard to reach out and proclaim the gospel to someone who's not a human. So the whole point is to make sure... What? Do I really think? I have no idea. If they did teach, I hope they are as fair as we are trying to be. Because otherwise they could really paint us to be horrible people.
Well, I don't know, but our country is letting the kids in school learn about Islam.
Yes.
And they are allowed to pray to God.
Yes, that's a different issue though. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, then last slide and we'll get out of here is tonight's takeaway. So first off, there is no unified Muslim culture. The variety of teachings and traditions of Islam are affected by the surrounding cultures it's a part of. You know, things start to blend and shift. But we can see themes that are commonly seen in modern Islam. But that does not mean that these themes are necessarily related to what I will call ancient Islam. Things vary. Things don't always match the Quran, and things certainly don't match from country to country. So with that being said, I think we need to realize when we meet someone who's obviously Muslim, we can't go in at all assuming what they are. And I think we're used to this process. I just want to make sure we realize that in order to preach the gospel to a Muslim, you got to know what they think first. If you saw someone walking around with a cross, you know, on a necklace or a crucifix, they could as easily be a 90-year-old devout Catholic woman, or it could be a rapper who talks about killing people. They wear it as a fashion thing. So the real thing is, we can identify Muslims generally, but we can't go in assuming we understand their culture and what they even think about us necessarily. Yeah, Roger?
Part of the problem is, in most countries, when Muslims infiltrate, they don't try to mesh in with local cultures. They seem to be separate. We don't want to mesh in. And when you say Minneapolis and Dearborn, they tend to...
Yeah.
Everyone to be involved with people.
So you have said something that's true. He said that Muslims, when they come over, they try not to change. They try and stay in their groups and not mesh. I'm going to play devil's advocate, because is that a problem? We are Lutheran, which means most of us are German. How long were we in this country speaking German? We still are. There are 4 churches I know of in St. Louis that have German sermons. So the question is, when you come to a new country, you want to be with people of like mind. I think that's just human nature. The difference is, I think we generally have them set up as this other. You know, these are these people we don't understand, they are other. And so the fact that they're not becoming like us is worrisome.
Well, in Europe, a lot of developments, a lot of militaries.
Yeah. Well, that's for... Yeah. I don't think that necessarily is the same thing, though. Bonnie, and then we'll pray.
I have read before that Muslims have no hope. We talk about that. They don't know what the point.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to do that. They do a lot of other things. But also, and I believe this is true, we'll maybe get into it, that the Quran spelled out things that guarantee will be happening, such as suicide bombing. Say suicide bombing. It says, you know, it's happening. And one of the things that will assure your presence before Allah is killing Israel. And we are Israel, and they don't want to.
That's another context issue. The quote that is usually said, if you kill an infidel, you get to go to heaven. It's I think 2 or 3 times in the Quran, but it's generally in relation to an infidel comes to fight you, and you kill him to defend others. That is the context that I remember. Mm-hmm. But is that from the Quran, or is that a cultural thing that's been added? Yes, that's what they're talking. And that's what I'm saying, though, is Quran can say this, people will say this. Just, you know, Well, hold on. I'll talk to you afterwards because we're going to pray. We're over time. So let's take a moment. Lord, we thank you for the great conversation today, and we hope that we all heard what needed to be heard and that we said what needed to be said. Help us to see our Muslim brothers and sisters and those around the world, well, brothers and sisters, neighbors, as someone that you created and love. And help us to see them as someone that we can proclaim to, getting to know them. That being said, Lord, we do ask that you would protect our Christian brothers and sisters around the world, because there is danger, even in this country. There is strife, and we ask that you would bring your peace and safety to them as well. We ask this in your name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. And also, if you want to be a team member before you go, grab a sheet, let me know, and I'll tell you how to do so. And if you want to donate to a good cause, I can help you do that too. Thanks, everyone.
The